and present.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty happy with one using that aren't
All right. You want? I got intro.
two of the major companies.
So this is Jennifer. She works with me at Pinterest. So perhaps my favorite presenter tonight. You know, a little bias. I can, with confidence, say that if Jennifer was not making our web testing platform work, web would be years behind. Web would be a nightmare, and there would just be nightmares every day. Jennifer has turned us from incidents every day to less than one a week. Even better.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction, Ryan. Ooh, no. Is it? Oh, dear. All right. I'm just going to stand here and talk for a little bit, and we're going to pretend that this is exactly going according to plan. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. So, as Ryan mentioned, my name is Jennifer Uvina. I don't think you mentioned my last name, but there it is. Uh-oh. This isn't working either. All right. How are you guys doing?
I also do IT support.
All right, there you go. All right, yay, sweet, thank you. So my talk is called Retrofitting a Testing Culture. As Ryan mentioned, I work at Pinterest. I'm part of the metrics quality and test tools team. We're an interesting team that's in charge of both making sure that our business critical metrics are accurate and building our testing infrastructure on client side. So that means we work on web, Android, and iOS. Different people for everything, so don't freak out. And basically this talk is the end result of me working not only at Pinterest, but at a couple of different startups and changing the cultures there to be a little bit more accepting of testing. I tried to make this kind of as generic as possible in order to make it applicable whether you're working at like a 10-person startup or like something like Slack. We will have time for questions at the end, so bear with me. All right, so this is how we're going to be talking today. We're going to go through what retrofitting is, what are the benefits, bunch of little steps that will kind of guide you along the way for retrofitting your own culture. And then at the end, we're going to wrap up with some lessons I've learned along the way, and then we're going to open up for questions, right? So retrofitting, right? Simple definition, it's basically taking some new piece of technology and kind of mashing it into something that already exists, right? You can do it many different ways. You can do it via deprecation of like an entirely old framework and just building a whole new thing. You can do like anywhere from like 0 to 100% on that spectrum. You can even bring back old technologies that you know that your company had at some point that serve kind of the same purpose to just kind of like fit it into your newer models. There's a lot of different ways and flavors to retrofit, but when we talk about retrofitting into a culture, what we're really talking about is making a slow and gradual change to change what the norm is, right? So we want to have other people talking about testing. We want to have people not really question it, but accept it as part of the process. So when we're retrofitting, we're gonna like be rewiring all of our colleagues to just kind of accept testing as part of the flow, right? So testing culture, a lot of people, when they hear those words, they immediately go to test-driven development, but that's not the only form of testing culture that you can have. This can be anywhere from just like having a team that like always makes sure to include a screenshot of their unit tests when they make a PR, or like, you know, going full ham and being like, okay, we're blocking everything until all the tests pass, right? There's a lot of different flavors of this as well, but in my experience, I found that testing really empowers engineers more than stops them. When you have the confidence to say like, you know what, my fix for this bug will not create any more bugs, that's just kind of a good feeling. We want to promote that, right? So just a few things to say is just one person can make an impact. A lot of the things I've done in my career have started like from me realizing that testing is important and that, you know, kind of like the culture needs to change. A lot of people have bad associations with testing in the past, and as long as you can show them a positive experience, it kind of all flows a little bit better. As we all know, testing increases velocity, just in the terms of like, you know, you're not doubting yourself, you're not being like, am I actually breaking this? You know, it just kind of flows along. If you have something that can verify that you're not actively moving your product backwards, I think that's a good idea. And lastly, it makes it easier to debug when there are problems. Even if you have just tests that are running in the background, they're not really blocking. If you go back and look at those tests and realize a grouping like, oh, you know what? All of our search tests started failing probably first and then everything else kind of went on fire. But you know what? The search test went first. So let's go look at that, right? It kind of gives you like a smaller point to focus on and then move on in your journey. Right. So to start your testing culture, these are like some of the steps that I recommend. First, you're going to evaluate, you're going to set some goals, you're going to run some tests, demonstrate your value, and you're going to normalize. Normalize can also be thought of as evangelize, but we'll get to it in a second. So evaluate. Really look at what you have today and ask yourself, is it working? Is it something I want to keep, right? You want to make sure that you keep in mind, like, maybe there was that like one framework you brought back, but then at the point it was like too much work. You just wasn't really like fitting what your development standards were at the time, but like maybe now it's time to revisit it. Just remember that any sort of context that you have will give you more ammo to fight against the no's, right? If someone said that framework was too slow, then you can be like, okay, this new one's going to be faster. Just get little bits and pieces from what you've already done in the past to inform your future. Most important, I think, is you're going to want to benchmark. The reason benchmarking is important is you can't prove your value later on if you don't have something to compare it with. And it's totally fine if your benchmark right now is like, we have no tests and we have to roll back in production like 5 times a day and it's scary, right? That's a totally valid benchmark. I've been there, but as long as you remember to really write it down, because in the distant future, when everyone tests, you'll look back at today and not really be able to articulate what was wrong. So articulating it now will help you in the future when you want to measure your journey, right? So the goal with what you're going to be evaluating, if it is like a new technology that you want to bring in, is that you just want to make it easy to use. The enemy of testing is difficulty. A test that's hard to run will never be run, right? So you want to make sure that all of the barriers between people and testing are removed. So that's kind of like part of this evaluation process. You're going to be trying to see maybe that your build just takes really long. So you're going to have something that's extremely fast to make up for it. Whatever your situation is can be different, so just keep that in mind. Setting goals. Setting goals is important because it keeps you true to yourself. It keeps you honest, and it keeps those around you, once you start enforcing your goals, it gives them something to look to, right? So even if it's just for something as simple as I want to be able to run the first unit test on this code base, set a date for it, because then you'll probably stop putting it off if it's something that's scary to you, or it'll just give you something to look forward to and be like, you know what? On February 13th, I'm going to run my first unit test and it's going to go awesome. And even if it doesn't pass, at least you ran it. And you put in the effort to put in all the testing frameworks and just make it run for your system. Make sure you model some milestones and success criteria. Milestones can be anything from hey, I got the framework set up, awesome, to wow, everyone in the whole company is running tests. Hold off on that one a little bit, be nice to yourself. The reason that it's important to stay true to the goals that you set is because if you're in a place where there's an antagonistic relationship between yourself as testing and others, they're going to try to poke holes in your argument, and if you yourself waver on your own goals, they're going to take that as leeway to say that testing is not as important, which is not what we want. All right, so skipping a couple of steps here, but let's assume that you have some tests running. You put in the work, you have the framework, you can run the test, you know the command, right? Even if it is just that one local test for that one problem that keeps coming up. Maybe it's that recurring bug that you see, oh man, that ticket's coming back to me again, or it's just oh, you know what? Yep, login button disappeared. How are people gonna log in? Every company has that one problem that probably led you to this place, right? That's probably the problem that made you think if we had testing, this wouldn't happen. I would strongly suggest that you start on that problem first. That way, you have measurable proof that everyone can say hooray, the login button will always exist, right? So run your test. Obviously, you're going to have a lot of setup on your own computer if you are setting it up from scratch that other people won't have. So when you're trying to set this up, it's a good idea to ask someone else to run it on their computer and just kind of like watch, right? See, like maybe you forgot like, oh yeah, you know what? You need the JDK installed and you need like, you know, this other command. And like, I totally forgot because I did that so long ago, right? And when you see those moments, remember to document them. Because at the end of the day, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to hand off testing to other people and have them run it on their own efficiently, right? So at the bottom of that slide, I have the word simplify, just because the more that you simplify now, the easier it'll be when you try to roll it out to more people, right? And just, you know, for your own sanity, it's good. Okay, so demonstrate value. This is the point where your tests are running. You were able to get someone else to run your tests. And now you're going to stand up in front of people and you're going to be like, my testing is awesome. Look at what it did. You remember that login button that disappears sometimes? I made sure it's there, right? So at this point, you're going to like look at your goals that you set initially. You're going to compare against those. You're going to look at those benchmarks and you're going to compare against those, right? So maybe it's something like, you know what? We had like 5 rollbacks last week. And I think that, like, you know, I was like patching along with it and I ran the tests and I actually caught the errors. So like, I think if we had this test in place, we would have only had like 2 rollbacks. Or like, you know, maybe if it goes from 5 to 4, that's a valid option too, right? Whatever it is, you're going to show other people that your test means more. It has numbers, it has a value. And the most important part about this step is to be vocal and advocate. Because if other people aren't hearing about the value of your testing, no one's gonna know, right? The more that you're out there and speaking about like, hey, this test solved this problem. I think if we had more tests, they would solve these other problems as well. The more people will start thinking about their own problems and being like, wow, maybe if we had a test for that, that would work too. That's the ideal, right? So normalizing. This is being vocal again, but in a different way. So once you have your test, it's like, you know, running on whatever cadence it is, someone's looking at it, even if it's just you. Start like shouting it from the rooftops. So being like, wow, you know, this test caught that search failure the other day. Remember that search failure? I caught it, you know? And just like really start advocating for your test, because the more people that you have talking about your test and the more people that you have invested in the results, the more people are going to start talking, right? The ideal goal here is to have you not be in a room and other people talking about your testing. Like, that's pretty awesome. Like, if you can like take a vacation and someone comes back and like they ask you about like, hey, you know what? I was thinking about like this and this test. Like, you know, you've started to change the culture. You started to change the water. Everyone's a little bit more accustomed to testing at this point. And at this point, what you want to do is start kind of getting it to spread. Even if it's like as simple as like just having your team and like your team will have the strong testing culture, that will kind of, it'll start growing to others, right? So one of the things I really like to do in this step is to infiltrate onboarding. So let's say you have a new person coming in, you're going to volunteer yourself to be like, oh, no, it's okay. I got the onboarding on this one. And you're going to talk them through that dream that you've been working towards, right? You're gonna be like, yeah, and for every PR, we have to write a test and you have to have a screenshot because you've been living this whole time, right? So all of your PRs have the screenshots and all of your work has the tests. And now they're coming in, you know, you're going to tell them the norm of like, yeah, no, we just test. And as long as like your team goes with it and you start enforcing this, that person doesn't know that world of no testing, that horrible, horrible world that they came into. They're going to be advocates for you. And then they're going to be like, well, wait, why doesn't that team do it? Like, it's just like, it's the better route, right? And you're going to be like, yes, that is the better route. So by infiltrating onboarding, that's actually like a really good tactic. You grow your numbers like immediately, but also you just never have to break the bad habits in a newcomer. And that's worth a lot more because usually the problems that arise come from people that are like, but we do it this way and don't want to change, right? Another thing that helps if you're at a bigger company is to start distributing ownership. So the more other teams that care about this testing, the easier it's going to go, right? And sometimes the way that you sell it is as selfish as like, well, you know, search team, I caught that search regression. You work on search, you know, connect the dots. But what you're doing by like being vocal again, but in this different instance, is you're trying to create this culture of acceptance, right? That newcomer that just onboarded, they just think testing is part of the flow, and that's how you want everyone to think. If enough people come in and start thinking that this is just the way it goes, it will be the way it goes, and then you've done your job, right? So I really like this quote. Remember, code is your home, and you have to live in it. No one likes to live in a very, very dirty home, and I think that tests help you clean up a little bit along the way, right? They'll reduce your bugs and just kind of make the place a little bit cozier. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that I've learned. So probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense here, but I'll try to give you some background on what these screenshots mean to me. Up here at the top is when I joined Pinterest. This was our testing suite. We did have a full testing suite, which was like really nice. But the problem was that no one paid attention to it, right? So you can see like up here, reliability was 10%. Oh, by the way, so there's two things associated. The top is desktop web, the bottom MWeb is mobile web, and then I've documented what it was actually this morning. So reliability used to be 10%. People let these tests fail over and over again. No one looked into why. No one cared. They said they were flaky. They said they weren't important. They said it didn't matter. Flash forward to today. It's been like a year and a half-ish, almost 2 years later, and we have a reliability of 97%. Another fun thing that you can see is up at the top, we had 17 builds a week. We only deployed twice a day if we got lucky. And now we have 254 builds a week. We deploy every 20 minutes during business hours. Nice. So this would not have happened if we didn't change our testing culture. So I actually did all of these steps, and I slowly started changing things to where people started paying attention to these, to the results, to the flakiness, to the ownership. Back at the top, it was like, you see how like there's two green runs at the right? That's why I took that screenshot. I was proud. I was like, you see how I didn't fail 2 times in a row, guys? That was exciting. It does take a lot of work. I'm not going to say it doesn't. I spent a lot of time tracking down our flake, fixing it for other teams to show them that we could have the stability that was needed to be a deploy blocker, which, as you can see from the screenshots at the bottom, is true. We do that today, even though sure, sometimes like there's a problem that like breaks and it'll like cause a lot of failures. We know that those failures are real, the problems are real, and the solutions are real. And as a result, we haven't had major rollbacks in like a couple months, I think. Yeah, which is also very exciting. So, right, more lessons learned. Don't make yourself a bottleneck. This kind of goes back into the whole like advocating and like documenting and just being really loud about everything. I've definitely made myself the bottleneck by like being like, oh, well, I set the whole thing up. It's just easier if I do it for you. Don't do that. Because at a point, there's only so many people you can help in one instance, whereas your documentation can help everyone, right? So the less stuff that's in your brain only, the more that you're enabling other people to take ownership, to make improvements even on your frameworks, right? Distributed ownership, this one kind of goes for bigger companies, not so much for smaller startups where you know everyone, you see everyone's face. But when you don't know all of your engineers, ownership is going to be key. They should be invested in the results, because even if they don't think that testing is important, the failures that it catches are, right? So you need to show them that the less regressions they have in their product, the happier they will be. Ergo, they should be paying attention to those test results. So this only one failure scenario is something that I fought a lot back in the old screenshot and the reliability of 10%. When you set your goal, so one of my goals, let me go back here. So the goal I had set when reliability was 10%, I was like, I'm going to get these tests stable. We're going to have them block on every deploy. and that's just going to be it. So we had those 2 green runs, and then we had like, 5 more green runs after that, and I decided that we were stable enough. Then we had a couple of red runs, and people were like, oh, it's flake. It's flake, I knew it. And I was like, no, I've worked on this. This is a real failure. And I had so many pushbacks to like, let's just deploy. Like a week ago, we didn't care if these were green or red. And I said, no, we're not going to deploy until this test is fixed because these are stable, right? You need to be able to assess your situation, acknowledge when you're wrong. If that test was flaky, I would have let them deploy because then that would have been bad on me. But once you know that your tests are stable and are testing the right things, you just need to dig in your heels as hard as it is and say no. Because if you let them deploy with just 1 failure, where's the difference of just 2 failures, just 3 failures, and why look at the suite, right? Don't get into that rabbit hole. It starts with 1. Most of the things I've done have started from myself, including this big change at Pinterest. Like I did have the support of a whole team of really incredibly talented people and management, which also helped. But I'm still the face of testing at my company, and if it weren't for those little steps that I took along the way, no one would have stood up and said like, hey, testing's important. They would have just been like, I guess we don't have testing here. Sucks, right? I talked a little bit about the last point, stability matters. If your tests are not stable, you're not really testing anything. So make sure you're testing something before you stand up for it, right? And I'll leave you with these nice words that I made up. You got it. And if you have any questions, let me know. Questions? Questions?
A comment.
Yeah.
You were talking about the culture in the company that you had to build it, right? And I think I just got lucky when I joined the company. Everyone was supportive and they were testing itself. Like all my developers, they're testing and they're helping, and this is really good. But you were saying the right words. Sorry.
Yeah. So it's basically a comment on some companies will have a good testing culture already. Appreciate it. That was something that someone fought very hard for, or maybe you just got really lucky. Either way, if you don't have that currently, don't feel discouraged because you definitely can change. And even if it's just like the people in your immediate vicinity, having that sort of safe space will make you feel better and more confident about your changes. And if you have any engineers or other people that like feel a little bit like wishy-washy about their changes as well, you might want to suggest testing, because I find that it does give like a good psychological boost, more or less, to just like see all that green flash on your screen and be just like, yeah, I did it right. So thank you. Anyone? Nope. Yep.
Have you come across cases where like leadership just doesn't really care that much and you feel like you're fighting against your manager?
So the question was, have I ever come across situations where management didn't have buy-in into testing? The answer to that is yes. I have been like the one-person testing advocate at other places before, and it's hard. Not going to say it's not, but I really do think that as long as you show the value to other people, like anyone that's reasonable will also come onto your side and recognize that testing is a little bit more important than not. I do also recognize that like when you're at a small enough company, like, you know, if there's only like 5 of you, it is going to be a little bit of a burden, but I feel that I mean, obviously I'm biased, right? I'm here. But the overhead of writing a test gives you more security in the long run than the time it took for you to write it in the first place. And I think if you can just consistently prove that, even if it is just like taking the extra time to like make sure that all of your things have tests and just consistently prove like, well, you know what, my things didn't have that many regressions, I don't know. That will go a long way into changing other people's minds. Does that kind of cover it? Okay, awesome. Yes?
How about like education? Because I feel that a lot of times it's easy to sell, cool, go write tests. But a lot of engineers, like testing is like any other skill, and you need to learn the tools and the best practices. So how do you go from hey, cool, we all want to test, to, hey, we're all testing properly. Like, I guess there's probably a lot of investments in education and training that you guys have done in the meantime.
Okay, so the question was about education. Testing, like everything else, is a skill. So how do we kind of educate people to go from like 0 to being able to write their own tests? I do agree that education is very important. One of the things I do whenever I start up a testing culture in a company is I write my big, heavily opinionated document on what should and shouldn't go in testing. I started, like the first company that I was in, I was the only one that wanted to do testing, so I started reading up a bunch about it. I feel like there's always going to be like 1 or 2 people that like already have some things in mind for testing, so like those should be the one that shape the culture, write it down, and kind of, even if you don't really know if you should call it a best practice, if you write the best practices title above it, it becomes that. So we did. It's kind of true. You know, you do the best with what you have, right? So even if it isn't the best, it's better than having like no standards. So what we do try to do is like documentation is number 1, because like anyone can read it on their own time. They can go as far into it as they want to. But at Pinterest, what we do is every like half a year or so, I go into, we have something that's called the Web Guild. So it's like all the people that want to make the web platform better. And I go in and I give them a talk about, hey, like here's some testing, like ask me some questions, where do you want the framework to go? And then we just kind of shape the discussion together. We're also in the works of revamping some of the educational like documentation that we have, and we're going to try to get that in front of every new hire pretty soon, just because like that's something that we've until now left up to teams, but it's important to just kind of get consistent across the board. Does that cover it?
I mean, yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, I mean, I think other things that I've seen, I don't know if you guys have done this, but I think someone mentioned that Slack, they do test week.
Okay.
Like test week in the past. I saw that was positive at a previous company.
Yeah. I think like any sort of like bigger testing events like are obviously very welcome. I think it just depends on the size of the company that you have and like kind of like your engineering culture, right? So I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all solution there. You had a question?
So my question is, what would you do if the developer is telling you that this is not a bug, that this is just a feature? The source of truth for you? Is it like a updated test case?
Good one.
Big one.
Okay. Yeah, so the question was, what happens when a developer says, oh no, that's not a bug, that's a feature, right? Where do you find the source of truth? So one of the things I like to go back to personally is if you have any sort of product managers at your company, like they should really be the ones making the decisions. I try to kind of like push it up along the chain as much as possible, just because like I have my own thoughts and I know that they may be controversial sometimes. So if you have a product person, I would have them make the decision, just that way that they can shape your product in where their vision is going. But I think generally speaking, unless there has been a major product change, if there was an existing test that was passing and then someone dropped in a piece of code and like now it's failing, I think they're in the wrong. I don't know. I mean, there's obviously caveats, like if the code was wrong initially or the test was written incorrectly, but it's on a case-by-case basis. If I would say ask a product person. If you are the product person, you got to make the call. So it's pretty nice. All right. Mm-hmm.
End you with a Pinterest slide.